Hey friends, just wanted to come back and do a recap on Ephesians chapter 2 from our last Freedom Culture get-together. And there was a nice group of us doing, we had an awesome discussion on this chapter and just understanding the old creation and the new creation and how that gives you, like understanding your new creation, how it gives you access to your inheritance. And so I just want to recap this. I want to try to keep these videos to just, 5 to 10 minutes, somewhere along there. So I'm not going to be able to give you the full teaching that we did, but I just want to recap for you. So we went to chapter 2 in Ephesians, and we're kind of just looking a little bit more at how Paul expounds on the old creation versus the new creation and how that plays into our inheritance. So as you read through chapter 2, even now, pause the video and read through chapter 2 and then come back. Because what I want to talk about is, first of all, recognizing the past tense verbiage that Paul uses in chapter 2 to describe your old man. He says things like, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, that you formerly walked according to the pattern of this world, that you formerly lived by the lust of your flesh and in the indulgence of your mind, that you were by nature children of wrath. So he uses this past tense verbiage to remind you that when you are born again, when you give your life to Christ and you receive his life into yours, when you put your faith and your trust in him as the Son and the Lord, that the old things pass away. As a matter of fact, in 2 Corinthians 5:17, Paul tells the church, if anyone is in Christ, he has become a new creation. Old things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. So when you step into a life with Christ, you have literally like shed a skin, almost like a snake does. You shed that old nature, that old man. Now, what you come to understand as a Christian, if you've been a Christian for any certain amount of time, you know that that does not mean that you stop dealing with the old man or stop growing and maturing from that place of that mindset. Even when God delivered the children of Israel, it took him a moment to deliver them out of Egypt, but it took him a lifetime to deliver Egypt out of them. And it doesn't need to be a lifetime to deliver you out of your old mindsets, but it does help us wrap our heads around the fact that just because he pulls us out of an old space doesn't mean we're automatically just never going to look back to it. In our humanness, in just being a member of this earthly world, we know that temptation is still there, that experiences are still there, that our family life is still there, and those things that can trigger old mindsets. And so we do have to deal with that. But what he is reminding us is Paul is saying, hey, that's former, that's old. And what's important for us to understand is that dead things have no power. So when you were dead in your transgression and sin, you had no power. You had no power over sin. You had no power over the known and unknown places of rebellion in your heart. You had no conviction. You had no care about it. But then you became alive. So you are now a new creation. And Paul goes into verse 4. He says, but God, being rich in mercy. So he lays out your old nature, and then he says, but God. And then he starts to go into the new. That you are now alive in Christ. You are seated in the heavenly places with Christ. And he goes in Romans 8 and he starts to talk about how we now live by the Spirit. We need to live by the Spirit now that we're new. And so now that we're a new creation, we are alive and we have power over sin and darkness. So the difference is now you're alive, you have power. And that the old has passed away, it has no power over you anymore. So when old sin and temptation come knocking on your door, you know that because you're alive in Christ, you now have the power to overcome those things that you didn't before you knew Christ. And we know that those things no longer have power over us. It was 2 Peter. 2 Peter tells us that we are partakers of a divine nature now. We no longer have the nature of Adam because we inherit our nature of Adam when we are born into the world. We're born by a corruptible seed. But now we find our life in Christ and we live by the incorruptible seed in Christ. So we were once slaves to the first Adam, the flesh nature. We got born again and our spirit came alive and now has power being alive in Christ, the last Adam, the incorruptible seed. Does that make sense? So you had an old nature, now you have a new nature. Here's the trick. You have to make the choice to walk in your new nature. The old things are familiar. They seem to make more sense to us because we've had the most experience with them when we come to know Christ. So we're always going to want to come back to that old place of thinking, that old place of seeing, the old place of hearing, the old kinds of people we hang around, the old establishments that we hang around. We're always going to want to come back to that. But what Paul charges us with is says, hey, those things are old, now you're new. So now you no longer actually have to live by that old nature, but you have a choice now. You get to choose because those who are alive and free get to choose. That doesn't mean they're forced to walk in a new creation. That means you have the choice. So I want you to say to yourself right now, I am not powerless. And the reason why I want you to understand that and really grab hold of that, and I tell myself this every day when I start to get into those mentalities, that I'm feeling overwhelmed and overtaken by things in my life that I feel powerless to. I remind myself, you are not powerless, Rihanna. You are no longer dead in your transgression and sin, which means it no longer has power over you. You're not powerless. You're alive in Christ. So I have a choice. So it isn't, I can't do this. I can't resist that temptation. I can't say no. I can't find a new group of friends. I can't do this anymore. It is now, I choose not to. I choose to say yes to that thing that I know I'm not supposed to do. I choose to hang out with the people that I know are corrupting me. I choose to not do the disciplinary things that I know I need to do to give myself life. I'm choosing that. It's not because I can't find the time and I can't find the energy and I can't find the will to do it, because now we have the power to do it. And I don't know why I got off on that tangent, because there's a whole nother space to this, but somebody needs to hear that. You can, because you have the power to do it. You are not powerless anymore. Anytime you say, I'm powerless, I can't do it, you're now reverting back to that old nature. We need to walk in that new creation that says, I'm alive, which means I have the power. I have all the resources that I need to do what I need to do. I live life by the Spirit, and I am now a partaker of a divine nature. I no longer have that old nature of Adam. Okay? So this is important to us to understand, because we know that the old has no more power over us. So there's three stages of our walk with Christ and our maturity with Christ. Number one, as you get saved, you give your life to the Lord, that rebirth activates your DNA. It's like you come alive and it activates the DNA of heaven inside of you. So you are now a partaker of a divine nature, and that's where 2 Peter comes in. 2 Peter chapter 1 says that you are now a partaker of a divine nature by his precious promises. So you no longer have to say, I'm just this lowly peasant, orphan, beggar person that I just can't seem to get my life together and I'm just kind of begging God to make it happen. He says, now you have become a partaker of that divine nature. You have it in you. It's in you already. Okay? You're not trying to pull from the outside. You're releasing it from the inside by acknowledging it and saying, I am not powerless. I am a partaker of a divine nature. Okay? The second thing that happens then is that DNA reveals your identity. Once you understand that you are a partaker of a divine nature, no longer of the nature of Adam, you realize I am a son in the kingdom. I am no longer an orphan. I am adopted. Right? Ephesians chapter 1, we talked about that. I am adopted. I am now a son or a daughter of the King. That's my identity. I'm no longer of the world. I'm now of the Spirit. And then the third thing that happens is when we acknowledge that identity, it gives us access to our rightful inheritance. And this is a beautiful thing because the inheritance is locked up in you. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11. I'm actually going to read this to you. It says, also we have obtained an inheritance, having been predestined according to his purpose, who works all things after the counsel of his will. Okay? And then when we talk about the eyes of our heart being lightened, it says, so that we would know the riches of his glory let me read that again. Pause. So that you would know what is the hope of your calling, what are the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. That means his inheritance is found in you. It's not something you're going around trying to look for, looking under every stone, looking over every mountain, trying to find it. It's in you. The inheritance is in you. So stepping out of the old creation, the old mindsets, the old thought patterns, the old words that you speak, speaking death over yourself and over everything. I can't do that. That's too hard. This is not going to go my way. That's just going to end up crummy. Talking death. You go from the old to the new, speaking life, speaking authority, speaking power, acknowledging who you are, acknowledging who he is in you. And as you acknowledge what is in you, that releases the power of your inheritance. What is my inheritance, you say? What is an inheritance? That's a whole nother chunk of the sermon that we did together. But the recap, I actually read a will to the group. I wrote out some of the inheritance points, promises in the word as if it were an actual will document. I read it to the group. And so I'm actually going to post the link here. You can go to the website, occupy-freedom.com, and download that document and read it to yourself. But it's really just a beautiful painting of how the will of God, the inheritance that he left us, that's inside of us, is really the power and the resource that we need to do every single thing that he calls us to do. And so to understand that inheritance is to live with victory, is to live with the resource you need to succeed and progress in all areas of your life. So I encourage you to go over and download that document. That kind of gives you just a highlight of what we talked about with inheritance. But remember, in chapter 1, to know your identity and then to activate your identity rolls into chapter 2, where you understand when you step from the old creation and choose to live out the new creation, even when you don't feel like it, even when it doesn't seem like it, even when it doesn't look like it, even when everything else around you is fighting against it. You choose to walk in the new creation because you have the power to do so. You are not powerless. And when you acknowledge who you are in that new creation, it gives you access to your rightful inheritance. And as you acknowledge who you are, it releases the power of that inheritance in you. So I hope that helps a little bit with recap and context when you come visit us when we meet first Friday in March. And then we can just pick up where we left off. So love you guys.